Hello and welcome everybody. We're so pleased to have you here at Gallery 400 for the first in this spring 2016 Voices Lecture series. And so pleased to have Olga Stefan as our guest for this first lecture. So for those of you who don't know, Gallery 400 is the contemporary art space at UIC, and we welcome audiences from across the campus as well as from across the city. I'd love to know if anybody who's here is here for the very first time. Has anybody never been to Gallery 400 before? Oh, good. So we have like a familiar audience. Welcome back, everyone. The Voices Lecture Series lineup for this semester is a really stellar one, and I want to tell you a little bit about it in hopes that you'll come back for some of these great talks. So they include talks and screenings by film and video makers Thomas Allen Harris on February 25th and Kevin Jerome Everson on April 2nd, as well as talks by artist Mario Ibarra Jr. on April 6th, art historian Robert Kelsey on April 11th, and philosopher and artist Aaron Manning on April 18th. More information on all of these speakers can be found on Gallery 400's website, so if you're interested in any of them, please go there, and hopefully you'll come back to enjoy those talks with us. Tonight we have the talented Olga Stefan as our guest, an independent curator, writer, and lecturer. Olga is the curator of Few Were Happy with Their Condition, which is on view in the gallery through March 12th. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to come back and see it. It has been a pleasure working with Olga on the exhibition and on the two-day film festival that we just had this past weekend. I want to thank Olga for all of her generosity in sharing the artworks and the films that she's brought to us and to the many audiences who've seen them. Thank you so much. So a little bit about Olga, and then I'll let her speak for herself. Born in Romania, Olga immigrated with her family to the Chicago region when she was 8. Later, she attended the School of the Art Institute here in Chicago, directed Chicago's Around the Coyote in the late 90s and early aughts, worked for a time at Woman Made Gallery here in the city, and was in the mid-aughts the director of the Chicago Artists Coalition. Since 2009, she's been based in Zurich and has been doing her independent curatorial and writing work. Her exhibitions include Laughter and Forgetting for the Bucharest Art Week, Few Were Happy with Their Condition, which is shown not only here but previously at the Kunsthalle Winterthur and the Motorenhalle Dresden in Germany, Blurred Lines and Showtime at ABC Contemporary in Zurich, and Drawing Protest at Skedhalle Zurich, among many other exhibitions, in fact. She's also developed solo exhibitions for artists Dan Perjovsky and Leah Perjovsky and Stefan Constantinescu, and is organizing an upcoming exhibition with artist Karen Keiter. She contributes regularly to the periodicals Art Review, Freeze, Art in America, Flash Art, Sculpture Magazine, Art Slant, Art Margins, and Turn on Art. Tonight, she will present her curatorial practice and projects within the context of her migratory condition, revealing challenges and advantages and how her experience of migration has informed her curatorial and her artistic interests. Please help me welcome Olga Stefan.
So Lorelei, I think I don't actually need to do a presentation anymore about my curatorial practice because you did a much better job. And thank you very much for that introduction. And actually working with you was fantastic, and working with Gallery 400 is a real pleasure with the whole entire staff. It's been a wonderful experience, and I thank you for hosting the exhibition. I will start a little bit with this photograph. This photograph is one that I took recently in Romania. I went back to Romania to a little village where I used to spend my summers. It is a photograph of the beach, and to some extent it represents, to me anyway, it's an evocative image to me. It represents the scattered souls and scattered bodies that are strewn together by various forces in this common space. And to some extent, this is the experience of migration. And I found this to be a very, let's say, indicative photograph of how various types of seashells, maybe metaphorically representing all of the various peoples that are brought together by forces such as war, economic hardship, maybe even climate change, that have been brought together in other locales So this photograph can start off our discussion today. So migration, in the context of a university situation, maybe we go over some points of migration as a phenomenon throughout history that challenges our perception of the pure identity of various ethnic and nation states, right? So migration is an absolutely inherent part of humanity. We began as migratory beings. We have always migrated in search of food, safety, food resources. This is the human condition. Initially, of course, we migrated in family groups, and our societal construct of identity is focused on the family group or tribe, which is challenged now in modernity and in the contemporary context by the various intersections of families and individuals. So prehistory is characterized by this migration in family groups and tribes. The migration period historically is associated with what we call the barbarian invasion period. The barbarian invasion, of course, is from the perspective of the Roman civilization, right? The Romans were the civilized, and everybody else, all of the tribes from the Germanic areas, the Slavic areas, those were the barbarians. So anybody who did not share the values and structures of the Roman civilization were the barbarians. So we have a period of chaos that led ultimately to the fall of the Roman Empire and the resettlement of Europe by various tribes, various peoples that came from different regions and mixed with other local populations, either through conquest or purely through marriage and so on, and developed other populations and other hybrid societies. We see this, let's say, leading to the idea of the modern nationhood concept with the centuries, of course. Centuries later, we have the construct of the modern nation state, nationhood, that was developed with the French Revolution or in the time of the French Revolution. And we see the idea of a connection between peoples that is also geographic-based, ethnic-based, language-based. And we now understand in this modern period 3 different types of nations. The ethnic nation, the people sharing common language, civilization, culture, religion, etc. The civic nation, which is a political construct with borders, administration, centralized administration, etc. And that we can call it a willingness to live together with a centralized political entity that controls those regions, and then the nation state. Benedict Anderson, who's a historian, actually speaks about the contemporary situation of nationhood as an imaginary community, because what we do ultimately is create an idea of what we are and then present that as our personal identity. And that imagined community, to some extent, defined the nation state and nationhood, the idea of nationhood, for many decades and even centuries, until now. This brings us to this contemporary situation where a globalized situation, a globalized economy primarily, and a globalized world starts putting those constructs under question marks. What is ultimately a nation, and what is ultimately the concept that we've been dealing with about identity, ethnic identity, and so on. What is it that characterizes a people? So that's the question that we are currently faced in the aftermath of such migration, right? So here, I just wanted to put a quick map in about the migrations that led to ultimately the fall of the Roman Empire, and then modern migrations. And modern migrations mean of the 20th century that also, of course, lead to the contemporary situation that we hear so much about. So maybe America is not faced with the migration, the kind of crisis that Europe is faced with now, the crisis that reflects their questioning of their own identity as Europeans, French, English, what does it mean? These questions arise now all the time in Europe, and the questions are constantly posed by people who want to kind of maintain this traditional image of the French people. Maybe in America, because America is built on a tradition of immigration, those questions are not quite as deep and as abrupt. However, we are faced, even in America, with those types of questions in the migration crisis, in quotation marks. Now, the migration crisis itself has to be questioned, especially now that I've shown how these migration patterns have always been part of the condition of modern history, too. In the aftermath of World War II, we see a huge flow, and World War I and World War II, actually, a huge migration, yet again, of Europeans towards other parts of the world, New World, Asia and Africa as well. And nowadays we have Africans and Asians migrating inversely towards Europe, America, and so on. So this was just a quick view of how migration has been an inherent part of humanity and human history, and that we have to be very skeptical of the construct of the identity of a people that is ultimately something that defines a nation. So for me, just a quick biographical overview that Lorelei did a very good job with. So I was born in 1975 in Bucharest. In '83, we left Bucharest for Chicago, and en route to Chicago, we had a 2-week stopover in Zurich, where ultimately I ended up again, and 3-month stay in Italy. I spent grade school at Hawthorne and Bell, so 2 schools. High school, also 2 schools, Lincoln Park and Niles North. My college, I left out an L, sorry. My college education was Kenyan, and 1 year abroad in France. I did my master's at the School of the Art Institute, and I was the director of Around the Coyote for a few years before spending a year in Nice, where I would have liked to possibly remain, but circumstances took me back to Chicago, and I received an offer for the position of director at the Chicago Artists Coalition. Until 2009, at the end of 2008, early 2009, we moved to Zurich. And starting there, it became a question for me, what do I do here? I'm in a new culture, I don't know the language. What can I offer? I can't be an arts manager. You know, my experience in Chicago was one of an arts manager. I was the director of these 2-3 organizations, and that cannot translate into an actual position in a place where I did not have a network, I did not belong, and I did not speak the language. So the questions of what do I do here, of course, started to form in me a need to basically start adapting. So from the sensation of displacement that I felt that was very acute in the first months, maybe year, I started, of course, having to deal with the stage of adaptation. I have to adapt to this new world, this new place where I'm at. And how do you do that? Of course, you start learning the language. That's very important. But I soon found out that that's not enough. Learning the language in that society was not enough. The network was really the most important. So I had to adapt my skills to a new situation. And that meant a lot of self-questioning, like what am I capable of doing that I can do here? And basically what that was to start writing, and this was the way that I was brought and confronted with the local art scene in the most efficient way, started to write about what I saw. At first I started writing about what I saw privately on a blog, because I didn't necessarily have the connections to various magazines and so on to publish. And based on the writings that I did on my blog, little by little I started getting writing assignments from international publications. It was really a work of building from the ground up, from zero. And that put me in touch, of course, with local galleries, local artists, and of course a network of international magazines where I did start publishing my articles and my reviews. And that ultimately, little by little, created a sense of belonging. I started knowing various actors in the art scene and started making these types of connections that are absolutely mandatory when you're working in the arts. And looking back a little bit on the type of work that I've done, I realized that due to these experiences of displacement, of adaptation, of needing to find outlets for the issues that preoccupy me, I realized what type of exhibitions ultimately, and what type of exhibitions not only from a personal curatorial perspective, but also from a writer's perspective, what kind of work actually interests me. And the work that does interest me is the work that analyzes existence in this contemporary and conflictual world that we live in. Work that addresses that struggle of making sense of what we're dealing with on a daily basis, and reflects a certain analysis of the contemporary condition. That's my website. You can see some of the work that I've done in the past in more detail. When I moved to Zurich, I came back to Chicago a few months later to curate an exhibition at the Highland Park Art Center that featured a few artists that maybe some of you have heard of, Annie Heckman, Chicago-based artists. For a limited time only dealt with the ephemerality of experience and art itself. The illusion that we have that art to some extent is permanent, the illusion that it remains, that something in this world remains. So these kind of topics kind of recur in my curatorial practice. The topic of ephemerality, the topic of what is it that we leave behind. And this particular exhibition dealt with the fact that despite all of our best intentions as artists and makers, whatever it is that we make, not only art, but makers, despite our best intentions, the reality is that everything is a limited experience, a limited thing for a very brief time. I mean, we've occupied, historically, humans, this world for a very limited time, and the illusion that our work will remain is also an illusion. Yes. So that is what this particular exhibition dealt with, and the work itself was not documented really well. The intention was that that exhibition was the only form that these objects would actually have. And the text was written on a rice paper that was actually edible, so people consumed that particular text during the exhibition. So that was the end of that experience. Moving to 2011, and this is a year and a half maybe after my arrival in Zurich. This show is called Return of the Yellow Peril, and I invited two artists that, let's say, are Swiss, meaning they have Swiss citizenship and they are based in Zurich, however, feel themselves to be completely marginalized by Swiss society and not of the Swiss, let's say, nationality. They're made to feel marginalized and not integrated by Swiss society. So working with them was very interesting because indeed their experience was illustrating my own to some extent, but they of course did it artistically. So Teresa Chen is a Chinese American who moved to Zurich about 15, 20 years ago. And Cat Tong is from Vietnam, and he emigrated with his parents right after the war, Vietnam War, and you know he's of course become a Swiss citizen, but still feels other. So this idea of otherness and ephemerality, they keep kind of coming back in the issues that I deal with, curatorially speaking, and in my writing. This particular work on the right, the mobile, is of photographs of various Asian immigrants to Zurich. And the work on the left, the two images, one is yellow and one is beige, those are by Cat Tong, and they're photographs of his mother, like silk screens actually of photographs of his mother that are made in various typically Vietnamese inks. The next project was just another brick in the wall, models of artistic production in Romania. And this exhibition took place in a commercial gallery. Barbara Seiler Gallery is a commercial space. But the projects that I invited were, let's say, nonprofit or artistic initiatives in Romania, or collaboratives, or so on. So it was a combination of different modes of actually making ends meet and actually producing something within the context of a very difficult economy that does not support artistic production, that of Romania, and the ways that artists are able to manage in some way to produce work. So, for example, Leah Perzhowski is an artist that established the Contemporary Art Archive, which is her own project, her personal project, and yet it has moved beyond just being a personal artistic project to actually being an archive of the last 30 years of artistic production in Romania and abroad. She managed to accumulate various pieces of information from all of the exhibitions that she deemed important and bring those to Romania and create this archive for various art historians, students, artists to explore at a time when there was no such information available in the country. So that was one of the most important artistic archives that existed in the country, and it was her artistic project. The Bureau of Melodramatic Research, it's an artist duo. Center for Visual Introspection was at the time composed of 3 individuals, 2 artists and a curator, and together they developed various both artistic projects and curatorial projects as a group. And for some time they did have a space and then became, let's say, itinerant when that space closed. Plan B Gallery was actually a commercial space, even at that time, but had started as an artistic initiative and just developed into an established commercial entity. And then Club Electroputere was a curatorial duo who took over an electricity factory in a town in Romania, and there collaborated with the administration to be able to exhibit and to make exhibitions in that location. Paradis Garage was also an artistic duo that occupied an actual garage and made exhibitions in that garage. And Harta was also a duo, no, excuse me, three-person collective that created various artistic projects and research projects, but also curatorial projects in public space. They were very socially engaged and often worked with very marginalized populations in Romania. The next project was called Drawn Together, and this was a project that came from my interest in collaborative work and what that actually means. What does it really mean to collaborate? Is this just another utopia? Is it possible for us to collaborate really? Or is it just another illusion that we tell ourselves that people can truly and meaningfully collaborate? What does it mean in terms of power relations? How do these collaborations actually function, and how do they unfold in the interpersonal relationships? And what I decided to do, because I was trying to connect my identities or my personal narratives and histories, I brought together 6 Chicago-based artists with 6 Swiss artists and connected them in couples, in duos, to try to develop collective projects. And you might recognize some of these names. Selena Trepp is now a Chicago-based artist. Cody Hudson, Danny Hine, Diana Fried was actually here today. So, basically the idea was that somehow people are forced by circumstance to work together. The situation with migration, you're placed in a situation where you just basically have to adapt to this new situation. So I wanted to see, can people function in that way, in a successful and meaningful, is communication a tool and a strategy for a successful collaborative undertaking? Can you use language to get to an artistic conclusion that satisfies both parties, of course? Well, that is an interesting experiment, and it doesn't work necessarily for everybody. Some are more successful than others in being collaborative, and this particular exhibition was indeed an experiment. And maybe 2 or 3 of the couples managed to reach an actually satisfactory conclusion. So I was very intrigued by the approach and how people undertook this challenge that I posed. Then, on the background of various, let's say, new nationalistic sentiment that was boiling over in Switzerland, and various new laws that were passed, anti-immigrant laws that were passed in the country, in various cantons and various small towns. On the backdrop of that phenomenon, I curated an exhibition that responded and that took that as a starting point, that political climate as a starting point. This exhibition was called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Hospitality as Artistic Practice, trying to understand if once confronted with the other, we can actually integrate the other in our life. And what are those relationships between the self, the other, on a very personal, micro level, me and you, but then on a more global and macro level between the us and the them. And is it possible for us to eliminate those borders through artistic art? Through art, does art have a place in eliminating those barriers and those borders? So this project was only 2 days long, but I think that it is one of the most meaningful projects that I've done, because it put artists, literally, the artists were confronted with this task of trying to find various solutions. And one of the projects was by Katong Nguyen, the artist that I had worked with previously, who's primarily focused on performance. His practice is very much informed by performance. And his work, we see it in the lower left-hand, the remnants of his work are in the lower left-hand corner where you see this basement with the shelves on it. His work basically entailed going into the houses of strangers that he met on the street, if they were willing to accommodate him, and cooking for them. So he placed himself in the middle of the street with a sign, "I am willing to come into your house. Will you let me come in and cook for you?" And then he did, and documented, of course, all of that interaction and also the reactions of the passersby. And he cooked for them traditional Vietnamese food. And then asked them to offer him a symbol, an object that to them illustrated friendship and, kind of a memento of that interaction. Then that object was brought and displayed as a successful successful interaction, ultimately. So for each day of the exhibition, there was a shelf, there were 2 shelves placed for each day of the exhibition, because he intended that he would achieve 2 of these types of interactions per day. And at the end of the exhibition, we had maybe 3 objects. So that tells us that we're all very reluctant to let foreigners into our house, but when we do, those interactions can be extremely meaningful, and we can learn quite a lot from this exchange. Another project within that show was done, this middle photograph was done by the Roma Collective, and they did a very multimedia installation that included dance, that included other types of performance, also some, let's say, confessional work, like individual members of the collective came to talk about their personal experiences as Romas living in Switzerland, and the stigma that is placed on the Roma population and the challenges that they have to deal with in this country. And then there was another project by Daniel Sperry, who is a very well-known conceptual artist from the, his career was established in the 60s and 70s, very internationally known. This particular project that is documented in the series of photographs on the upper right was a buffet that he threw, like a luncheon on the grass. But actually the project is called Luncheon Under the Grass, because after he threw this great lunch for 100 people, he buried like everything as was left by his guests for over 20 some years. And in 2003, archaeologists dug it up to try to document how all the objects had aged. And it was a very beautiful and quite scientific, ultimately, undertaking. And then the last photograph on there is of me being tied up by one of the artists, Navid Chup, who basically, it was like the illustration in performance mode of the relationship between artist and curator, and the power struggle between the self and the other, and who is trying to assert themselves in that tug of war, in that relationship. So the artist wanted to get rid of me. Okay. he wanted to eliminate any sort of creative input from the artist, from the curator. But it was a very, of course, in the context of this exhibition, it was a very compelling way because it was also eroticized to some extent. So the idea of the other and all of the nuances that go with our projection of the image that we have of the other were kind of illustrated in that performance. And this exhibition that I did in 2013 focused exclusively on Swiss artists working with ceramic in a contemporary, of course, mode. So nothing functional. There's absolutely nothing functional. Allusions to functionality, of course, are inherent. However, I tried to stay away as much as possible from anything that had any functional qualities. However, I was really intrigued by ceramic, and I wanted to test my own capabilities of curating to see if I'm capable of doing anything that deals with form. Am I capable of working on exhibitions that are primarily form-focused and material-focused rather than social and political? And I discovered that despite my best intentions to focus on materiality and form, I managed somehow to contextualize this as a social critique. And it was a very good experience for me. It allowed me to do a lot of research on the history of ceramic, its relationship to industrialization, its relationship to the bourgeois, the construct of the bourgeoisie, and how that also speaks to a certain status. Ceramic became an association with status in society, the development of the bourgeoisie and the middle class in Europe, and the leisure travel class, ultimately at the end of the 19th century, and so on. So that was a good experience from that perspective as well as aesthetics. But I moved away from aesthetics quickly, and I went into working on forms of protest. And I started asking, what are effective ways of disseminating information and actually affecting some sort of change? Of course, we have public space, right? We can go outside and protest, but we know that at this point in history, those forms of protest, especially in America, have kind of, this was 2014, have kind of been, let's say, dissolved. And then I took a look at what the impact of Facebook is on trying to maybe create alternative channels for disseminating information on protests, and if there is beyond that, beyond just dissemination of information, a way to actually be an activist, a real activist through, as an art activist, of course, through Facebook. So I took a look at what Dan Pejovsky has been doing for the past few years, which he's a Romanian artist, one of the best known Romanian artists, working currently, and he has been posting on his Facebook page various drawings in support of various causes, comments on societal phenomena, and of course, puns. He uses language in a very punny manner to illustrate the hypocrisies that exist in society and in the political parties. And what has been happening over the past 2-3 years on Facebook is after he posts these drawings of various issues and causes, people that are affected by those causes take those images that he creates and posts on Facebook and integrate them into either protests that actually happen in public space, or further disseminate those images to continuously create more support for those particular causes. What I was very fascinated by was how those images that he posts are then printed by users, right? Users of Facebook, and then they find their way into the protest movements, into the actual physical protests. So I really wanted to kind of show how images are circulated and how they become iconic of moments, historic moments, and start to represent, almost like brands, let's say, particular events that are taking place. So here in this particular exhibition, what I wanted to do was to combine printouts of the images that were on Facebook. So also, of course, questioning the authenticity of the image and of the artistic work. So printing out images from Facebook and exhibiting them as the artwork, but then also documenting how those images were circulated in protest movement, and then those particular images also becoming part of the exhibition. How are they utilized? So we had screenshots of his Facebook page with those images and all of the commentary that went on around those images, the likes, the hundreds of likes, the commentary. Some people agreed, some people didn't agree. Huge discussions were formed around certain topics that he, would present through images. And then I would include that as well as the images, and then another layer, let's say, of work was his own edition, quote unquote, authentic, erratic work on the walls as he would draw on top of those different layers of imagery. So here in this particular view that we see, there is the marker, his own drawing on the walls and on top of the various printouts that represented the images that were printed out, as well as documentation of how those images were used in different protests. This is a show that I did with an artist named Stefan Constantinescu. I dreamt of you so much that he did a series of 3 movies that traveled at various cinemas and other types of spaces. Here in Chicago, they were on view at the Filmmakers in 2014, in the summer of 2014. And here they were exhibited in a I created this very standard IKEA interior space because the films themselves dealt with these very private interior conversations. So the films focus on this 3 love stories, let's say, and that take place in these intimate spaces. So I wanted to reveal this kind of standardized, typical interior environment for experiencing these films. In addition to the films, we had some photographs on the walls that were of non-spaces that the artist had documented when he had first come to Stockholm. He lives in Stockholm, Sweden, and he was documenting various locales as a migrant to Stockholm. Of course, he had a completely different view of his environment, and he was kind of documenting this quote-unquote foreign world in which he was trying to make his own life. So from the view of a foreigner, these photographs had a completely different meaning. And this was a different, it was let's say a traveling exhibition that also had a different form in Leipzig. We constructed this box, the huge box that is on a slant, in which, so we converted that into, let's say, kind of a bedroom look. Interior, and on the interior it looked like a bedroom, and the films were screened on a screen in the bedroom. So people would have to go through the dark and kind of negotiate space, and of course the other person. So there was this kind of negotiation in a very private environment, in a very personal environment, the bedroom. How do you negotiate space with a foreigner, with a stranger, with somebody who's not, who you're not comfortable with? And then these are some images of the installation of this particular show in Winterthur. And this takes us to a very personal project that I did in October in Bucharest. It was called Laughter and Forgetting. It started from an image of my grandfather that I saw in a newspaper. And from that image, let's say a whole discussion about memory and about modes of resisting started. The title, Laughter and Forgetting, is based on the book by Kundera, Milan Kundera, who was a Czech writer who emigrated, or let's put it more clearly, had to leave from Czechoslovakia because he was a political dissident and he had been fired for his political thoughts and positions. So he took refuge in Paris, and he settled in Paris in 1978. This book was published in 1979. It was a novel. It was considered a revolutionary novel because it was composed of 7 short stories connected by certain themes that were repeating themselves in each story. So these 7 short stories are autonomous. They have their own characters, their own narratives. However, because they're connected thematically, this way Kundera established a completely new form of the novel and revolutionized it. It's considered a revolutionary novel as a result. So this particular exhibition followed that architecture, followed the architecture of this novel. It was, because it was also within the Bucharest Art Week, it lended itself very well to doing this project. So every day I organized a different exhibition or event that dealt with those themes that were established in the first exhibition, which we see here, which opened on the first day of the week-long show. So that particular exhibition featured these artists, all of them dealing somehow with the themes that Kundera established in his first short story. And those were, laughter, of course, and forgetting, and how those things become both tools of resistance, but also modes of just dealing with tragedy and trauma, and love, and there was a section about angels. Like angels for Kundera are actually the forces of oppression. So the angels are not these, saviors as we think in Christianity. For Kundera, they are those forces of oppression. They are the forces of traditionalism. They're the forces that instill in us the inability to think critically. So I thought that was very evocative and very interesting to change the significance completely of that. And the angel, for example, of history, Benjamin's angel of history, that he, the concept of the angel of history that he developed after seeing a painting by Paul Klee, a Swiss painter. For him, that was this constant, right? The winds of history that are illustrated by the angel, and how history is this violent confrontation between peoples and between moments of, between moments. So this exhibition dealt very much with the concept of political turmoil and what that means in a country like Romania, how laughter functions as an appeasement, let's say, and as a mode of trying to deal with hardship. And forgetting, of course, is a tool that is used by governments to eradicate the past, an unpleasant past that they don't like to include in the narrative and the identity that they're constructing. But also on a personal level, forgetting becomes a tool for us to be able to survive very unpleasant experiences. And this is kind of what it looked like. It was a very large hall, and we had lots of space to put our projects in. So it was very comfortable, let's say, spatially speaking. The lower right-hand corner is a piece by Dred Scott, who you might know is a graduate of the School of the Art Institute, and he is the artist that caused a huge furor and controversy years ago, I think in 90, Lorelei, do you remember? 90-something? With early 90s, yes, exactly. With a work where he placed the American flag on the ground and encouraged the pastors or the visitors to step on it. And at the time, it was absolutely considered blasphemous and unpatriotic, and maybe it still would be, but he did this before anybody else would have. So he kind of made a very important statement at a time when things like this were not happening. This is another one of the exhibitions that took place throughout the week, and it features a selection of films by a collective from Romania called Cinema Icon, and this collective has been operating consistently without pause and without stop for 40-some years, since 1970. 36 years? No, 46 years. Wow, 46 years. So since 1970, these guys have been working nonstop. Under difficult situation, you can imagine the circumstances where they were making film, but they managed against the odds to continuously produce experimental films in Romania, in a city called Arad. And here I asked the now, let's say, curator of this collective to make a selection of films that respond to the idea of love and laughter as strategies of resistance. And this compilation spans that period of time since 1970 to today. And as a result, it also reflects the changes in technology. So this group, this collective, has not only been making experimental films like on 16 millimeter, like film, but with changing technologies, they've also developed strategies of making, digital art and stuff like that. All, re-establishing the concept of what it is to make film today. So, in terms of my conclusions, my personal conclusions, and what I've seen through my, let's say, looking back at the work that I've done, migration has become, of course, a necessity nowadays for many. Many people look to other locales for economic opportunities, job opportunities, etc. They need to go elsewhere to find stability if their place, their home, is no longer stable for all of those reasons. However, in the arts, it has become even more necessary because, and this is not necessarily a permanent migration, but certainly in one's practice, migration on a temporary basis is absolutely mandatory, because this is the only way that you find out about the rest of the world. This is the only way where you can establish contacts, networks, etc. for exhibition opportunities, so your career kind of relies on that. And not only, it also broadens your worldview. It also puts you in direct contact with the other, whatever that other is, and encourages new modes of thinking. It allows you to expand your understanding of what it is to be a person and what it is to be yourself. And I think that those are absolutely mandatory strategies for existing in today's reality. Experiencing the world and working in the world, being confronted by the other, I have to repeat that, because being confronted by the other shatters our illusion that we are a very kind of solid and unchangeable self. However, it's not always great, to be in this situation, because there is also a lot of uncertainty to be a migrant. If you need to start over, it's difficult. If you need to reestablish all your networks from zero, it's extremely difficult. So those challenges exist and they're real. However, there's always the possibility for new experiences and new challenges that can really expand your understanding of how you can adapt and put you in a situation where you have to adapt rather than the comfort zone that you're used to. So that, in a nutshell, is my work and the preoccupations that I have. And of course, they're reflections of my biography. So thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
And just so you know, we're recording tonight's event. So if you do have questions or comments, I'd love to give you the microphone and you can ask your question, and it will get recorded. So feel free. No questions, no comments? Okay, well, maybe people would like to ask questions or talk with Olga privately, and I invite you to do so at this point. So thank you, Olga, for your talk.
Thank you. Thank you all.